Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
So recently, the U.S. Senate passed a bill to award Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, the Congressional Gold Award, which is Congress's, quote, highest expression of national appreciation for distinguished achievements and contributions by individuals or institutions, end quote. This comes nearly 60 years after Till's horrendous murder by white supremacists, his open casket funeral, and just under 20 years after civil rights activist Till Mobley's death. The bill co sponsors Senators Cory Booker of New Jersey and Richard Burr of North Carolina consider it to be, quote, long overdue recognition, end quote. However, some are not as optimistic. As MSNBC contributor Jahan Jones writes, quote, it seems like a hollow gesture for the two to receive medals from an institution that's been unable to pass an anti-lynching law. I'm
Mhm.
wary of performative gestures of anti-racism being used when substantive options are available, end quote. So I wanted to ask you, Andre, do you think the passage of the award is emblematic of racial progress in this country? Or do you think it's just performative?
Honestly, I think it is very performative for me. It's there
It's
are
going to be
so
performative for me. It's the performative for me.
It's the performative for me. There are so many problems with this whole congressional award. First and foremost, how are you going to sit here and say, "Oh yeah, we'll give you this award that recognizes all of your achievements and such," but still leave the very bill on the floor that was the whole reason for the journey that she had to take, that she was forced to take because her son was murdered. And it's very problematic because it almost feels like we're skipping to the end versus actually going through the journey to get there, you know?
Right.
Because we all understand how horrible it is that we still have bills and policies in place that still reinforce white supremacist values. And this particular bill, an anti lynching bill, is still being discussed and debated against as if a life being murdered is anything but a problem. That a life being taken due to the hate of someone's race is anything but something that needs to be taken immediately.
Right.
Action. And I think that it's very frustrating to me because I can only imagine how she feels. Is like y'all are giving me sort of a placating award to say, well, even though we can't do what you actually want us to do, we're going to give you an award to say, we're sorry. I'm so sorry that you lost your son to some incredibly horrendous racial violence. And I know that you want this bill passed that will stop what happened to your son ever happening again, or will at least put things in place to make sure that the people who do participate in that activity get the justice that they deserve, or get taken to get the punishment they deserve. Let me clarify that. And for the people
Right.
that they murdered, get the justice they deserve, because nothing can replace her son. Nothing can excuse or explain such horrendous crimes. But at the very least, having the government on your side to say, listen, if this ever happens again, we will make sure that we persecute these people to the fullest extent of the law and give you some form of justice in this horrendous death.
Yeah. And I completely agree. I think that it's one of these things where Emmett Till's lynching was like 60 years ago. And uh Till Mobley's death was 20 years ago. So you're telling me that it takes 60 years for Congress to do something about it? and Mobley's death was 20 years ago. It takes 20 years for Congress to give her some recognition. And it's one of these things that's entirely frustrating because I think it is performative. Because I like the analogy you had before of just like it's kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, we are having the reception before the actual event has even occurred. Like the
Mm,
event would be that action of getting a law on the books and being able to enforce said law. That is the
exactly.
event that we need before we can have this reception where we're giving out awards. And I think that it's incredibly performative, especially considering that, if we're being honest, both of these people are dead. Both of these people will never be able to receive this award in person. They would never be able to, have speaking engagements across the
Exactly.
United States to really talk about why I got this award and what it really means. And let's be honest, Congress is not going to do that. Congress is not going to really speak to the masses about why it's so important that we deal with America's horrendous history when it comes to lynchings. Because this is all well and good, but the people who really need to hear this message, the people who really need to that slap in the face to be like lynching is wrong, they're not going to read some congressional award on a website by Congress. Like, no, they could care less about going to congress.gov or whatever the website is, figuring out who this person is, why they got this award. And in general, I think that we need to stop rewarding Black death. Like
Mm,
it's frustrating because, like the award says, it is this achievement. It is for this achievement and contribution to society. And I think that it creates this negative that one of the highest, contributions or achievement a Black person can do is die horrendously and have the world talking about them. That is an incredibly insidious narrative to be perpetuating.
I fully agree, and and it slipped my mind that when you spoke about it earlier, but yeah, she's passed away. So that honestly makes this even more heinous in my opinion, because it's like not only is she gone and her son is gone, but to honor their memory, you give them some consolation prize. Because let's
Right.
be honest, that's what it is. Like you said, many people won't really actually look up the Congressional Award. I didn't even know that was a thing until we did the research about this episode. So it's really to me it's crazy to me that the government, especially when we talk about this conversation, I can't help but think about reparations and the things that have gone on in history that we still haven't gotten like a formal correct apology for the things that have gone on. And I think it's crazy to me that in 2022 this is even a debate. In 2022, a bill being passed that protects Black lives or POC lives is even up for discussion, even up for, and even something that can be like, oh well, maybe that might not be the best, or maybe this might be the whatever. The fact that we're having a debate about it, the fact that it's still on the congressional floors, not even being looked at, or people are pushing it down to not try to talk about it. It's like, just because you don't talk about a horrendous event or a horrendous part of American history does not mean that it did not happen. And we're
Right.
getting a lot of that kind of, it feels almost as if it's erasure, because this award
Mhm.
feels like it's placating the tragedy. It's saying, look at this award. Look, they achieved something, right? That's something. It's something, but it's not the actual action in place. And me and Daquon have talked about this before on Apology Plus Action. And it's one thing to say, I'm sorry, X, Y, and Z happened. It's another thing to actually put things in place to ensure that that thing does not happen again under no circumstances. And it's very unfortunate that even in her death and even in her son's tragic death, there was still no true justice served.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's heartbreaking to think about that. Is that she died, yes, And I believe that Emmett Till's accuser is still alive, correct? I think she
I believe
is.
so. Yeah.
And the fact that she's still alive, the fact that Emmett Till's mother went through her whole life never getting to see the justice that she deserved for her son's death, sought out or given. It's so heartbreaking. And this to me is just almost like salt in the wounds. It's like
Right.
instead of actually taking the time to ensure that this horrendous death will never happen to any other Black child again, or if it does happen again, that their accusers, that the justice will be served. There will be no doubt about it because it's on the books. And a lot of people don't understand this too. But everything that the government does, everything that laws do, reflect in society. It ripples. It's a ripple effect. And so when the government shows that they don't want to discuss a thing like lynching or racism, when they talk about it as if it doesn't exist or it happened way, way, way back when, that ripples throughout society. And so when you see that the anti-lynching bill is still on the floor, it's still not being discussed, it's still not being talked about, all that does is ripples through society, because now white people will be looking at this and being like, yeah, the government doesn't care about it, so why should I?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, Daquon?
Yeah, and I think that it really gets at this bigger picture of American politics are just a performance. It's one huge performance when you just look at it, whether it's Congress, taking a knee and having kente cloth on when during the Black Lives Matter movements, all of the protests and things going on during the summer of the pandemic, whether it's, even thinking about the voting rights legislation that's been trying and trying to be passed over and over again, but not happening, because you think about something like lynching, which should just be, all right, lynching bad, like everybody should have that understood, but we can't pass a bill about it. Having Americans have the right to vote should just be like, all right, people should be able to vote, but we still have so much trouble. And we see all of these different performances time and time again. And I think now we're really getting tired of it. I remember recently seeing from the descendants of Martin Luther King Jr., they were talking about, like, we're not going to do this whole performance celebrating for MLK Day because, MLK fought for civil rights. MLK fought
Mm-hmm.
for voting rights.
Mm-hmm.
And there is voting rights legislation that's like not being passed right now. So how can we celebrate this man while just like ignoring what he really fought for?
What he
How
stood
can we
for.
yeah, how can we celebrate Emmett Till and Till Mobley without, honoring what they fought for? So it's really just this performative gesture. Like you said before, there's no action behind it. It's like being like, all right, we're sorry this happened, but like, let's move on. And it's like, no, give us that action. How are you going to pay reparations for this? What type of justice are you going to provide, rather than just giving that apology, being like, we're so sorry? Like, that's not going to do anything for us. And we are tired of having to just ask for breadcrumbs. And they'll give us,
Yeah.
like, all right, here's Juneteenth as a holiday. We're good. Here's this award. We're good. No, we want action. We want things on the book, and not only just on the book, we need those things enforced.
Exactly. And that's the biggest problem, is that there's not action and there's not enforcement. And like I said before, and to reiterate, just because you don't discuss something doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right.
Just because this makes you uncomfortable does not mean that it's not a problem. And I think that when it comes to this kind of situation with the Till Mobley and the award, it just again feels like America's way of saying, oops.
Oh, well.
Now, with the COVID-19 going into its third season due to the most recent wave of the Omicron variant, the CDC has come under fire for its handling of recent pandemic recommendations and comments by CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. Now, on Good Morning America, Walensky stated the overwhelming number of deaths, over 75%, occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. So, really, these are people who were unwell to begin with. And yes, really encouraging news in the context of Omicron. Now, many people were horrified with the idea that the deaths of people with disabilities and chronic conditions can be seen as encouraging news. In a letter to Walensky, the Disability Rights and Defense Fund wrote, "Your words convey that the deaths of disabled people are acceptable. It perpetuates widely and wrongly held perceptions that disabled people have a worse quality of life and our lives are more expendable." So I want to ask you, Daquon, do you think that the CDC recent recommendation shifts and Walensky's comments are problematic?
Child, problematic is an understatement. Like, if we
Honestly.
are being honest, problematic is the understatement of the year
Yeah.
already, because this is beyond problematic. Like the Disability Defense Fund and Rights said, like, you are essentially saying that, oh, disabled, it's only the disabled people who are dying. They have all of these comorbidities, like they're already so sick. So like that's encouraging because us healthy people aren't dying. Like it's
Mhm.
fine. And it's like, Rochelle, we gotta talk. Let's
Can
just
we
like talk
talk?
for a
Can we
minute.
talk?
Rochelle, you're listening, Rochelle? Like,
I
see
believe we're on
me.
a first name basis. Rochelle,
We're
listen.
on a first name. I don't do the Miss Walensky. Rochelle, we're right here. How the fuck are people dying? Encouraging news. In what world do you think that people dying should be encouraging news? I think that people dying from this pandemic that we have not been able to have a grasp on really ever is not encouraging. It's incredibly disheartening and incredibly problematic to say something like this, because you are saying that these American lives are worth less than others. These American lives are expendable. We don't need them. If they die out, oh well. And the reality is, so many Americans in this country have comorbidities. So many people in general, when you think about what is a comorbidity, like it's not just the cancers of the world. Anything like joint pain could be a comorbidity.
Mhm.
You know, having a caffeine addiction is a
Mhm.
comorbidity. You know, all of these different things that so many people suffer from are comorbidities. So it's really disheartening because if you just look at the people in your life, you probably know somebody with a couple, if not 4 or more comorbidities. So imagine Walensky talking to you about your friend or your mother or your father or whoever in your life is important to you, your loved one, and being like, they may die from COVID-19, but that should be encouraging to you because you're not, because you're so healthy. Would you
Quote
really
unquote.
consider that encouraging news?
Exactly. I think there are so many things, and I think I want to just kind of just kind of go into it a little bit with the comorbidities. I mean, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis, sleep apnea, depression, breast cancer, and some of the other in the mental health field: depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, PTSD, panic disorder, social anxiety, OCD, and so many more things are considered medically as comorbidities. Now, I don't know about you, Daquan, but I know several people in my life who have suffered with one of these, even one, or if not multiples of these things that I've listed.
Right.
And these are just the few that I were able to look up. There are several more out there that are some very common things that most people have either dealt with themselves personally or know someone personally who has dealt with it. And for me, it's like it really reminds us how far and deep ableism runs in our society, because
Mhm.
it's the fact that she was able to make these comments, because we all know that when we make a big statement like this, or when someone like her makes a statement like this, it's gone through research teams, it's gone through her publicist, it's gone through so many different people who have talked to her and said X, Y, and Z is what you say, and X, Y, and Z means this, and this is how it affects these people, and blah, 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 whatever, so on and so on. And so it's crazy because in this case, we know that this has gone through probably several channels up before it got to her and before she announced it and made this um, um, statement. And so it really shows that even the people within the medical field believe that disabled people or people who have comorbidities have less value in society than people who don't.
Right.
And it's oftentimes because we very much so live in an individualistic society, especially in America. We believe that if it doesn't affect me personally, it's not real. Does that make sense? So it's
Mhm.
like, I've noticed something too. We learned about this in like China and Korea and stuff like that. They live in a very much sort of community-based society, and so like in their society, it's almost kind of frowned upon. Like if you're sick and you have to go to work, it's normalized to put a mask on and put gloves on and to stay away from people and say, "Hey, I'm sick. I can't X, Y, and Z," or "Hey, just so you know," like that. In America, we don't have that same kind of awareness of other people. We don't have that
Mhm.
same kind of, oh, if I'm feeling bad, maybe not hug this person. Or I'm feeling bad, maybe I keep my distance from people so I don't infect other people. It's the reason why the mask discussion is such a big thing in America, because and why so many people, especially if you see online, how many people are angry about having to wear a mask, and why it's mostly in America that we see these very vitriol reactions to having to wear a mask. And it's because we live in a society that believes that as long as once again, if it's not affecting me because I'm a healthy person and I live and
Mhm.
I'm doing the right things, so I don't have to worry about the other people as long as I'm good. And so we realize that even in this particular, especially in the medical field, we know this is a really, really big thing, that there is a lesser value for people who have pre-existing conditions. Again, these conditions are things that are sometimes, again, not things that they controlled. Sometimes some people
Mhm.
are just born with those particular comorbidities, and it's very disheartening, especially with people like science and medicine. These are the people that are supposed to protect humanity. These are the people that we rely on to make sure that we are safe. And we're realizing now, just like we realized before too, especially with Black lives, is that in the medical field, especially too, also that institutionalized racism runs deep and that ableism runs deep as well. And so we know that in the society, we know that in that particular situation, disabled lives don't matter in the grand scheme of things to the medical field. In the medical field, if you come into the office and you're feeling sick and you are overweight or you're whatever, that's the first thing they're talking about. That's the
Right.
first thing that's the issue. It doesn't have anything. They don't want to test you because they know that's the problem. And they just quote unquote know. And I say that very like that. They think they know, but they don't even take the time to actually take the test necessary to make sure that it is that, and if that really is the issue. And so it really just harkens back to this idea, because we know that disabled people are living very well. Some of them have very high qualities of life. And I'm sure no one chooses to have these pre-existing conditions, but they have it. And so the medical field is supposed to be able to take care of all people, not just the people who they deem healthy. Because of all of society, because of if every single person in the world, we know that for a fact that even just in races, that our bodies react differently to certain things in certain cultural, in certain racial groups. We also know that in this field of medicine, there are several different avenues to take for different situations. And for me, it almost feels a little bit like laziness. It's like, as
Mhm.
long as we get the people who are normal, quote unquote, we're good. Everybody else can go to hell. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it feels to me.
Right. And I'm so glad that you brought up racism because this is the melanin margin. Conversations about race are never off of the table. And we have to talk about how racism and ableism and classism, all of these different isms and phobias are all different heads of the same beasts. They're all intertwined and interconnected. And so
Exactly.
when I hear a statement like this, it is saying if you are not, this white, cis, healthy, privileged person,
Your
your
life
life
doesn't.
does not matter. Because we have to be real. African American, like sickle cell is a comorbidity, and that's prevalent in African American communities. Type 1 diabetes, high
High
blood
blood
pressure,
pressure.
high
Hmm.
cholesterol, very prevalent in a lot of different minority communities. And it's all intertwined because you think about it, if you only are able to get really sodium filled foods because that's
Mm.
all you can afford,
All you
and
can have
then you get
access
that
to.
pre-existing condition of hypertension, and now we're just telling you, oh, this was something that you really couldn't control, and now you have to suffer because of it. So it's really frustrating to hear these types of comments because let's be honest, the CDC this year, they haven't been on it. Like chop when they were like 5, I was like, I can't deal with this being like all of this influence of capitalism and literally CEOs of businesses being to the CDC. Our workers, they can't be out for this long. They can't do no 10-day quarantine. Like, cut that down. And then CDC cut it down to 5. Yes, they say that there's science behind it, but as a public health institution, public health should be at your first and foremost. Like, yes, there may be suggestions that it's okay to cut down to 5 days for quarantine as opposed to the 10 it was beforehand. But I don't know about you. Maybe it's just like scientists being like off the wall or whatever. But like, I like to err on the side of caution,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to people's lives. And so these decisions that the CDC has made, these comments are not putting so many marginalized lives in the center when they are the most vulnerable groups. Everybody, when the pandemic was starting, was talking about these essential workers, they're heroes, they're doing all of these things. And now it's just like, you're an essential worker and you die. Oh, well, sucks to suck.
And I think it's so crazy because when we talk about this discussion, we say Black Lives Matter, and people are like, first thing they say is all lives matter, don't they? Wait a minute, what were you saying? And blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like even in this conversation, we're talking about disabled lives. We know that in our society, it's easier. We know even from history standpoint, that disabled people or people who are neurodivergent, they were thrown away by their families because they didn't want to handle the workloads. Many of the family members had to, especially back in the day when asylums were a thing and lobotomies and stuff like that. They put them away because they didn't want to deal with a person who thought differently than them, whose mind works differently than them, whose body has to move differently than them, whose functionality works differently from them. And it's because we live in a society where we think that, once again, people who have disabilities, the people who are neurodivergent, they have a worse quality of life, or they aren't giving back. And I think that that's where it gets into it. We're a very production driven society, and so we think that if you're not able to produce at the highest level and highest quality, then you are not important because you are not bringing something to the table. But I do think that we need to stop acting as if disabled people are not working, disabled people are not doing things, disabled people are not living, they're out here doing what they're doing. And I think that we really have to get out of this idea of infantilizing disabled people and neurodivergent people, and recognize that they are fully embodied human beings. And yes, they may have a different functionality than you. Yes, their mind may work differently from yours, but their life matters just as much as yours. Your life does not matter more. And so I think that we need to understand that in this case, like we say, Black Lives Matter, disabled lives matter, because those are the lives that are at stake.
Now, the hashtag boycott Bumble has been trending on TikTok recently with over 1 million views. Lauren Smith Fields, a 23-year-old Black college student, was found dead in her Connecticut apartment this past December after going on a Bumble date with an older white man. The man in question was not investigated by the police because he seemed like a nice guy. Many women since then have started to come forward about their experiences with sexual assault and harassment from other Bumble users, calling out the hypocrisy of Bumble being an app that claims to put women first and encouraging gender equality. Yet women have reported being banned from Bumble after reporting their abusers. Bumble and its CEO, Whitney Wolfe Herd, has yet to make a statement about the death of Smith Fields or even offer public condolences for the events that took place because of the app. So I wanted to ask, should dating apps like Bumble be held accountable for sexual misconduct by its users?
That is such an interesting question. I think that it's there's levels to it. I think that while Bumble itself is not responsible for what people do, I do think that social media and dating apps have a responsibility to their users to create a safe space. And so I think that when it comes to that kind of situation specifically, it's horrendous that this woman was killed. And the police decided, oh, he was a nice guy. And I want to say this right here, and we're not going to get into it because that's a whole nother episode. But it's really funny how nice guy syndrome usually only works for white people and white men. I wonder why. I wonder why the police don't think that. I wonder why the police didn't think that George Floyd was a nice guy. I wonder why they didn't think that Trayvon Martin was probably a nice kid. You know, it's mighty funny how white men and women are get the nice guy, nice girl syndrome. It's interesting that police see them in that way, but that's a conversation for another day. Let me get back to the question at hand. Let me get back to the question. But yeah, I do think that social media spaces like this, you know, and like dating apps, they do have a responsibility to create a safe space for their users. And I think that we have let them go on for far too long not doing that. Because I don't know if you know this too, but a lot of dating apps, if you've used them, Bumbles, Tinders, all the apps or whatever, Grinders, everything, they don't have an ID check. There's no way to verify that someone is who they say they are. There's no way to verify that this person is 18 or older. So there are several 16, 15, probably even 13, 12, younger than that on these apps. And there's no way to ensure that. Now, again, of course, we know that people can make fake IDs and such, but there is no extra level. It's almost as if they're like, what happens, happens. And oops, kind of like it's giving very much so like, oh, we just created the space. If people murder people, that's fine. If people do this, that's whatever. No. Because with the amount of users that you have on this app, with the amount of people that engage to use these platforms, we have to get out of the fact that we need to get into the fact that we are in a technological society now. We need to get into the fact, we need to get into that. We need to get into the fact that we are in the tech age now, where we're not really meeting people in person anymore. We're not really meeting people or going out for coffee at a public places anymore. We're not doing that anymore. We can summon strangers to our house to drive us places, you know, so we have to get out of the idea that, you know, oh, they don't really have, because a lot of people make the discussion like, well, you know, not everybody has Bumble, not everybody has Tinder, so they don't have to do X, Y, and Z. And not everybody has Instagram, not everybody has blah, blah, whatever. And it's like, we need to get out of the fact because that's what they want. They want us to keep having the conversation that they're not responsible because they don't want us to realize the true fact of is that there is more people than not are online, especially in 2022. Now, maybe in 1998, 2000s or whatever, it might have been a little bit more difficult. But we're in 2022 now. These spaces, these Facebooks, Instagrams, Twitters, all these spaces, even Instagram, even YouTube, I believe, has a algorithm now that when you make videos, you have to specify whether or not your video is made for kids or made for adults, so that kids don't get recommended videos that have adult content in them. Now, again, of course, people can always lie and say no or whatever, and so forth, but it's a level of step. It's a level of accountability that this app is taking. that a lot of apps like Instagram don't, because I have yet to see Instagram make a space to ensure that people under the age of 15 or under the age of 18 are only able to access content that is for their age range.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that so often we just have people assume that the internet should just stay this lawless wasteland, quote unquote, this
Exactly.
wild west. And it's
Not the
like
Wild West.
the wild, wild west. But I think that it's so important that there are these measures of accountability because we hold physical locations to some sort
Mm,
of standard of accountability. Like if you go into a bar and you are not 21 and you get served a drink and you're like sloppy drunk and something happens to you, that bar can lose their liquor license. That bar can be
exactly.
shut down. If a club gets all of these allegations of rapes happening in the club and club workers just being like, oh, we don't care, that media is going to be covering that. People are not going to go to that club anymore, and
Liable to get shut down.
there could be reparations because of that. So just like you would hold a physical space accountable, we need to hold these apps accountable for creating something for safety, whether it's being that ID check, whether that's really talking about creating transparency about how these algorithms work, being like, hey, we see your preferences and we have at least some sort of vetting process. We check like sex offender registries to make sure
Hmm.
there aren't sex offenders on our app. Having something where you have that level of accountability, because if we're being real, if problematic users are on your app, maybe you make it too easy for them to be on there and do these things, especially with repeat offenders that get reported and then you just don't do anything. Or matter, you do something, you ban the person who reported them. What sense does that make?
I think that even going a little bit further with it, it's like I think that when it comes to these specific dating apps, a lot of them use your data, as in knowing where your location is, where you're going, how your movements, tracking what you swipe on, when you swipe on it. They read your chats, obviously. We know that that's a fact. There's nothing to be secretive about that there. And so when you make a plan with someone on the dating app, and it's like, I'm going to meet you at X, Y, and Z place, I think that there should be some way to track those movements to ensure that someone is getting to X, Y, and Z place safety, even if it's a suggestion within the app that you don't have to take, but the suggestion that says, all right, you're meeting X, Y, and Z on this day. We can send your location to 3 different of your emergency contacts as you're going. And if you don't check in at a certain time, we will notify them that you have not checked in your last known location. Building a profile of that person to ensure that, okay, you left this location at this time and this person didn't leave. So we're going to go send someone out for them if they aren't checking in on their app, or something that shows that these apps care about your well-being and your personage and your personhood. Showing that little extra step. And honestly, I don't think it's that difficult because you already have the information. You already have
It's there.
it's there. It's obviously there. And so to me, it's like, I just don't understand how these apps that are so ingrained in our society, so ingrained in our culture, Tinders, the Bumbles, the Instagrams, the fact that, like I said before, in 2022, it's almost impossible to meet someone in person first. Almost impossible. It's very unlikely to start relationships from meeting someone, unless you're in school or in college or maybe at your job possibly. But for the most part, people meet each other online. They slide into the
Especially
DMs,
during a pandemic.
especially during a pandemic. And it's just crazy to me that there are not these things in place that says, okay, you were supposed to check in at this place. Calling it, even if it's sending it to your emergency contact to say, hey, did X, Y, and Z check in with you because they were on a date with this person? Sending a picture of the person they were on a date with to their emergency contact to say, hey, they were last seen with this person at this location. Have you checked in on them? Something. But because they don't, and like we just talked about, is that these apps rely on that conversation of not everybody has it. Not everybody's using it. So we shouldn't have to do all those things. You should be an adult. And once again, just like YouTube, just like all these other things, just like YouTube got onto the border with it, just like even cable companies where you have to put in like a code to access certain channels because they want a parental controls or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Those tools should be accessible to everyone in these kinds of apps. And I think that we are, like you said, the bars have policies. They have policies in place to make sure that they try to keep their patrons safe. Restaurants have to be checked to be safe. And I think that there is no regulations for these apps. And that's the problem, is that there is no regulations. There is no, you can have this person, and this person can match when they match with these people and they make a plan to go X, Y, and Z, that you have to make sure that that person is okay. There are no regulations. These apps are not regulated by anybody but the app users and the people that pay them to put the ads on there. So right. The fact that there are no institutionalized law, just like we talked about before, about putting an anti-lynching bill on the record and on the dock, it's like the same thing with this. Put it into law that if a digital service is connecting people, that there are things in place to make sure that those people and their users are safe.
Right. And even beyond just like accountability, like we can get all into that, but bare minimum, Bumble should have just said something. They should have been like, we are extremely apologetic about this. We, are so sorry about this death happening. But like, they didn't send a public apology. They didn't, send out a public statement being like, hey, this happened and we're going to put action to it to make sure our users are safe. They're just like, oh, we're not going to do anything. And it's really curious because this happened to a Black woman. And it's just begs this question. Why does it seem like Black women always get the short end of the stick when it comes to justice in these disappearance or dating violence cases?
It's disgustingly racist. This is the best way to say it. White supremacy. Because we also know that there was a case a while back. I don't even remember this, Daquon, about Gabby Petito, who went missing last year.
It was everywhere.
Everywhere. On Twitter, Instagram. Just everywhere, trying to find the man that did it. But when a Black man or Black woman, specifically a Black woman too, because they are the least protected class in America, next to Black trans women, it's the facts that Black women in general are just not taken care of or protected because their lives are seen as not as valuable as this white woman or this white man even. And it's crazy to me that in this case, especially, like the fact that I didn't even know about this until you brought it to the table to talk about. I didn't even know about this. That's what really breaks my heart, is that something as horrendous as this to happen on a platform as big as Bumble, the fact that it was nowhere to be seen, at least not in my channels and in my networks, but that Gabby Petito thing was everywhere.
Every news station, every social media platform,
TikTok, Instagram, trending everywhere. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating that stuff like this, like Black lives are not even given the respect of being spoken about. That's how much we don't matter to the grander society, is that we're not even given the luxury of being spoken about in bigger spaces and given the attention that we need to be able to hold these places accountable. But white women and white men, let this have been a white woman, and I would have known about it before you, Daquon. Right. Let this have been a white woman, Instagram, Twitter. My mama, who doesn't even use stuff, would have probably known about it before we did.
Right. Let's pull from racist white people's favorite thing. If the roles were reversed and it was this white woman with a Black man, the black man would not have even gotten to the jailhouse.
Child, he'd have been dead the moment they found out it was a black man. Let's be
Boom,
real on
gone.
that.
Let's be honest. And it's absolutely disgusting because, like you said, this is just a product of racism in our country. We don't value black women in their lives. But, white people, white women, and white men, we value their lives a lot more. As seen by this white man being deemed a nice guy and just being able to walk
Walk
away
away.
scot free. So it's incredibly frustrating that something like this unfortunately happens to black women so often and we never know about it. Smithfields is only one case in, thousands, if not more, of black women and even indigenous women with the missing and murdered indigenous women movement happening. Like, so often black and BIPOC women go missing, they disappear,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, we didn't care about their lives anyway, so why should we expend any effort to figure out what happened to them? If they turn up dead, well, we didn't care anyway.
Mm.
Now, the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense. Let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. Andre, what do you have for us?
So today I wanted to ask you, Daquon, do you believe in soulmates or that one single person in the world that completes you?
I don't believe in the conventional idea of soulmates in the sense that, like, there's this one person that's destined to be with you and they just like completely complete you in every way. And because like human beings are complete, period. Like, I am a complete individual by myself. You are a complete individual by yourself. The people listening, they're all complete individuals. If you have not heard that, you are a complete
Complete.
individual. And I think that, other people can bring out certain qualities in you and like, push you to be an even better person, but
Hmm.
you're still complete. And even thinking about like, there's what, over 7 billion people on this planet,
Yeah.
that there's one person that you're supposed to meet to be your soulmate. That's kind of crazy in my head because I think that soulmates are not just like born and it's just like, all right, you have to find some way to meet this person or you'll never meet your soulmate. I think that soulmates are made. You make a soulmate because of the experiences and things that you go through. It's not just like, oh, laid my eyes on this person and I knew that they were my soulmate. Like, maybe you had just like this strong, you know, pull towards this person. But what really made that person your soulmate was like the conversations that you had, the things that you went through, the experiences that you experienced together. It doesn't even have to be like, trials and tribulations or anything. Like, positive experience makes soulmates, negative experiences can make soulmates. And because soulmates are made, I don't think you can think about it as like this one. Like, you may have this one or done, but what if that person dies?
Hmm.
What if that person is halfway across the world? What if that person just like may be your soulmate, but you met at the wrong time and you couldn't
Hmm.
have those experiences? Are you just like destined to like be alone for the rest of your life? No. So I think that soulmates can be made from a lot of different people, whether it's just somebody you meet and it's just like, oh, we click because of X, Y, and Z. This other person could also be your soulmate because you click on A, B, and C. So all of these different things make a soulmate. So it's kind of absurd to me to be like, all right, there's this one person and you have to like, chart the stars and
Yeah.
figure out what constellation is shining tonight to figure out who your soulmate is.
Yeah, I agree. Well, honestly, for me, when I was younger, of course, we all grew up on Disney and the stuff like
Right.
that. But as an adult, I've come to realize, honestly and truly, that I don't believe in soulmates whatsoever. I don't believe that they're made or born or nothing like that. I believe in general that there are people in your life that you meet, that you connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And those connections can be deep. They can be surface level. They can be just the friendship wise or the relationship wise and stuff like that. And I just feel like a lot of times we get so especially me growing up, you get so wrapped up in thinking that you're going to find this one person who checks every single box that you have in your mind. He has to be like this. He has to have this kind of body with this kind of
Tall,
personality.
has
Yes.
money,
Yes.
has a job, a
Yes.
boat.
Yes, and I think that to me is so problematic for yourself, not even for life, but just for yourself. Because when you look at life or you look at someone as a means to fitting into your life, that's a problem. I think that we have to look at life and through our experiences. And there are some people
Mhm.
who share experiences with you that connect you on a deeper level. And that means that you are connected. That means that you want to be with them. You want to spend your life with them. And I think that the idea of soulmates, first of all, you have to believe in a soul, number one. Number one. And there's the first thing. So, like I said, I believe that you can develop some very intense partnerships with people, some very intense connections with people. And I think that sometimes, especially with this idea, is what happens if you're not meant for someone? If we're going by the soulmate idea, because everybody wants to believe that everybody is meant for this one person, or everybody's supposed to have been in a relationship, but that's not the case. Not everybody on earth is going to find someone to spend the rest of their life with. That's a hard fact that we have to deal with.
And
It's not
not
maybe a
everybody wants to.
ex- exactly. We live in a society that perpetuates the image of the nuclear family. That we have to have the wife, the kids, the picket fence, the animal, the whatever the fuck. And to me, it's incredibly stupid because I just feel like
Not
sometimes
stupid. It's
I do. And to me, it feels so stupid because it's like there are so many different versions of happiness. There's so many. And I
Mhm.
think that there's so many different versions of a relationship because we already know in life that there are several people out in the world who love more than one person. And they
Right.
have polyamorous relationships or open marriages or whatever the fuck. And I think that in life, if you believe in finding that soulmate, if you believe in finding that one person that just fits your soul, because the idea of a soulmate is singular. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's the idea of this is the only person's soul that matches yours. You know what I mean? And so I feel
Mhm.
like that to me just doesn't, I feel like that doesn't work because I feel like everybody's their own individual person. Everyone's soul is different. And this person's energies and whatever may align with yours. But again, we know that people change over time. We know that some, like you said before, some people can align for a certain amount of time and they may shift. Sometimes your alignment's not ready for them yet. Does that not mean that they're not the person that you're supposed to be spending the rest of your life with? No, it just means not right now. And so I
Right.
think that we need to kind of shy away from this idea and start looking at life in the sense of making connections, making connections
Yes.
with people. And like I said, that's why I don't believe in soulmates, because I believe in making a connection. And even if that connection that you make is with yourself,
Right.
it
And
does
I
not
also think that, like, kind of getting to the point of the nuclear family that you brought up, like, if you believe in soulmates, I also think that a soulmate could be a friend. It doesn't have to be a relationship. It could be a platonic soulmate. The person you have the deepest connection with does not necessarily have to be a romantic partner. It could be a friend. And I think
exactly.
that's so important because so many times in our society, because of the way we have this nuclear family, we value this romantic relationship so much more than, a friendship. And I think that
Yes,
sometimes to really like find that connection with somebody, you got to be friends first. You don't want to be
exactly.
a romantic partner with somebody that you wouldn't want to be friends with at all. And so I think that we also have to really value friendships because they can be some of our most powerful relationships. And they don't need to turn into something romantic. They can stay a friendship and be perfectly powerful.
Exactly. Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. Now, in the article, Little Known Black History Facts, written by D.L. Chandler, we learn about Christina Mae Jenkins, the founder of Weave and Hair Extensions. Now, she was born in Louisiana, but details of her early life are scarce. What is known is that she graduated from Leland College near Baton Rouge with a degree in science in 1943. Jenkins started work at a wig manufacturer in Chicago in 1949, where she began working on a technique to make a more secure fitting wig. She then moved to Malvern, Ohio, and began studying how sewing in commercial hair with a person's natural hair added length and body. Thus, in 1951, Jenkins filed a patent for her hair weave technique, which she was granted in 1952. Jenkins owned and operated her penthouse salon in the Shaker Heights section of Cleveland until 1993. She also taught her hair weaving techniques across Europe at all kinds of different hair shows. Black women.
Black women, black women. Now, soon you'll be able to find commemorative U.S. postage stamps honoring Edmonia Lewis, the first internationally recognized Black sculptor. Lewis, also known as Wildfire, has both Black and Native American ancestry. She started her career as an artist by making medallion portraits of white abolitionists. The success of her work allowed her to travel across Europe, where she made marble statues honoring her Black and Native heritage. Her work has been featured in exhibitions for the San Francisco Art Association in 1872 and the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876.
Ciao. We magic. We just magic. We got superpowers. This is the only
Melanin magic.
We out here creating all kinds of stuff. Like we got the hair game, the art game, the music game. I mean, we just
right, because how often do you hear about Black sculptors? So get you them postage stamps.
Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and keep the conversation going down in that comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you are using. Now, you can also follow us on social media. Our handles are at Andre Talks a Lot
and at Daquon MUE.
Now, our podcast is actually on Instagram as well at The Melanin Margin for updates of new content. Now, we will see you all next week on The Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlight in any way that we can.
Goodbye now.